Welcome to the second lecture in our course. In the previous lecture, we outlined the plant groupings or the categories within the plant kingdom. We say that the plant kingdom can be divided into two. We have the lower plants, the cryptogams, and the higher plants, the phanerogams. Now we say that the cryptogams are made of the algae, the fungi, the lichens, the bryophytes, and the pteridophytes. Today, we shall look at algae. Now, algae. If you have ever fetched water from the river or from a spring, you'll have realized that sometimes you see some green colorations or green matter on the water. That green matter is actually algae. Like the photo that is presented before us, the green coloration that is appearing in this place where I'm hovering the pointer, this is just algae. So this one is referred to as pond scum. Now, algae exhibit a great diversity in size and even in structure. Algae can be unicellular, that means they are single-celled, colonial, several cells forming colonies. It can be filamentous, that is they are made of filaments, or it can be thalloid. Thalloid, we said in the previous lecture, is where the body form is just a thallus. Some algae are microscopic, while others are very big in size. Now, when you look at the structure of algae, you'll realize that they do not form any complex organs or tissues. But when you use an electron microscope to study their ultrastructure of the algae, then you realize that the blue-green algae are the only ones that are prokaryotic, while all other cells of the algae or the groups within algae are eukaryotes or eukaryotic. The algal morphology. When we talk of morphology, morphology just refers to the outward appearance. How is something appearing outwardly? Now, morphologically, we can distinguish algae as being either unicellular, colonial, filamentous, heterotricus, thalloid, or polysyphonoid. I've already told you what colonial is. Those are a colony of several cells. Filamentous, they're just filaments coming together. Now, heterotricus means that the algae has two types of branches, and the two types of branches, there's that which is partly, the thallus is partly prostrate or partly upright. That is the meaning of heterotricus. Now, polysyphonoid is coming from the word siphon, which is just a filament. So it means, poly then means many siphons. So many filaments. So these are just algae that have multiple filaments. Want to look at the examples of the various forms of algae, and we'll be outlining an example in each of the categories. And an example is anacystis and microcystis. Colonial algae, we have microcystis and volvox. Filamentous algae, that means algae that are made of filaments, we have nostoc, blue-green algae, Eulothrix, and Oedogonium. We also have Heterotricus algae, I've said these are made of two types of branches, one which is the thallus is partly prostrate and partly upright. We have Drapalnadiopsis, Coelocate, and Ectocarpus. We have the thalloid. The entire body is just a thallus. We have vulva and fucus. Fucus is the brown algae. We also have the polysyphonoid algae, and an example here is Polysiphonia, which is the red algae. And to remind you, we've said Polysiphonia or polysyphonoid means that these are siphons in poly, so several siphons which are several filaments. So they have multiple filaments. Characteristics of algae. Now, algae are very simple plants. They don't have roots, they don't have stems, and they don't have even leaves. Now, when you look at the structure of the algae, they are made of chlorophyll, but some have blue pigments, yellow, brown, and red pigments together with this chlorophyll, and we all know chlorophyll is green. Now, a majority of the algae are unicellular, but very few are multicellular. And some, like the seaweeds, are very, very large. Algae are mainly aquatic, but a few of them will inhabit damp soils and shady places, like for instance, Spirogyra, Anabaena, and Sargassum. When you look at the cell wall of algae, it is composed of true cellulose. Now, the reserve carbohydrates that are normally kept by algae are in the form of starch and not glycogen, like in the case of fungi. Next, we want to look at the classification of algae. Now, to classify means to group organisms that are similar together. So when you're talking about classification of algae, we are grouping the algae according to the similarity in their characters. Now, organisms that exhibit or show similar morphology, similar life cycles, similarities in the physiology and biochemistry are actually genetically related from the evolutionary point of view. Now, therefore, we can categorize algae into the following 9 divisions. Now, when you see any scientific name ending in PHYTA, that is phyta, it denotes that this is a division. When it ends in ACEAE, Aceae, it denotes that this is a family name. When you find a name ending in Opsida, OPSIDA, it denotes that this is a class name. If it ends in ALES, ALES, then that automatically is an order. And when it ends in Idae, it is a subclass. In this lesson, we are going to look at the divisions. The other categories shall be looked at another level when we'll be looking at phycology. So the first division is Cyanophyta. Cyanophyta are the prokaryotic algae, or some books would refer to them as the blue-green algae. And an example here is Anabaena, Oscillatoria, and Nostoc. The second division is Chlorophyta. Chlorophyta, from the word chlorophyll. This is what most people would refer to as the algae. And an example here is Chlamydomonas, Spirogyra, and Chlorella. For our class, we shall be looking at Spirogyra in details. Thirdly, we have Phyophyta. Phyophyta are the brown algae, and examples is Fucus, Sargassum, and Laminaria. Next, we have Xanthophyta. Xanthos means something yellowish. So these are the yellow-green algae. An example is Vaucheria and Botridium. Next is Chrysophyta. Chrysophyta are the golden brown algae, and an example is Cyanura, Malomonas, and Chromalina. Number 6, we have Euglenophyta. Euglenophyta from Euglena. These are the euglenoids. An example is Euglena and Trachelomonas. Next is Dinophyta. Dinophyta, dinoflagellates. These are the dinoflagellates. An example is Serratium and Pteridinium. The next is Cryptophyta. Cryptophyta, some books will refer to them as the Cryptomonads. Cryptomonads. Not Cryptomonads, Cryptomonads. An example of a Cryptomonad are the Cryptomons and Chromonas or Chromonas. And lastly, we have the Bacillariophyta. The Bacillariophyta are the diatoms, and an example is Diatoma and Flagellaria. Now, Spirogyra. Spirogyra belongs to the family Chlorophyceae and in the order Conjugales or Zygonematales. So Conjugales or Zygonematales can be used synonymously. This is a cosmopolitan plant. Cosmopolitan means it can be found in either a habitat that is the water habitat or on land. So Spirogyra is cosmopolitan, and it forms a tangled mass of filaments on stagnant fresh water. Remember the photo we saw at first? Especially in ponds, in ditches, in springs, and even in streams. You'll find that some species of Spirogyra even grow in running water. So you can wonder how can it survive when the water is moving. This species produce short unicellular organs for attachment that are referred to as hapteron. This hapteron makes the Spirogyra to anchor on the seaweed. So now when the water moves, they cannot be washed away. Now Spirogyra is commonly found as a bright green mass of thread-like or filamentous structures on the surfaces of waters, and it's normally referred to as pond scum. When you resume, we shall be looking at the internal structure of a Spirogyra in the laboratory. But meanwhile at home, you can still look at it online. Now the structure of a Spirogyra. A mature filament of a Spirogyra is unbranched, and it consists of a single row of identical cylindrical cells that are joined end to end. The cell wall is made of cellulose and pectin. When you look at the external cell wall, you realize that it is covered by mucilage, and this is what makes it to be shiny. Now, the cytoplasm is a thin layer with spiral bands of chloroplast. Now, when you look at the cytoplasm, within it you'll find that there is a nucleus that is suspended at the center by the strands of the cytoplasm. Now, the chloroplast, which of course contains the chlorophyll, they contain small nodular protoplasmic bodies that are called pyrenoids. Now, when you look at the pyrenoid, you will realize that there are deposits of starch grains around each pyrenoid. Ecological adaptation of algae. Now, algae range from unicellular microscopic to multicellular, very large macroscopic thalloid forms, and they grow in a variety of habitats. Algae can be found almost on all the surfaces of the earth. Now, wherever there is water, or just a little moisture, or even just water vapors, and there is light, however feeble, you'll find that algae will appear as green, yellow, or a brown patch. Now, when several types of algae grow together under similar natural conditions, we refer to them as a community of algae. Now, the composition of a community is determined by the physical and the chemical nature of the habitat that the algae is occupying. In many cases, the algal community indicates to us, or it tells us, what is happening within the habitat, or it indicates to us the nature of the habitat, whether it is rich or it is poor in nutrients, or it is polluted, etc. In other words, algae serves as an ecological indicator. Now, the first habitat that algae will occupy is an aquatic habitat, and therefore will have aquatic algae. Most of the algae will grow in water. However, we'll find some that will be subaerial. Now, depending on the concentrations of the salts, there are various kinds of water bodies. We can have fresh water, we can brackish water, we can have sea water, we can have brine salt lakes, we can have salt pans. Now, these habitats may contain many types of pollutants like excessive organic metals, we can have heavy metals, we can have industrial effluents, we can have pesticides, and these are normally produced and dumped by you and me, human. And this normally greatly affects the algae and other organisms that are present in water. Now, the second category are freshwater habitats. They comprise, freshwater is made of rivers, we have mountain streams, we have lakes, we have temporary rainwater puddles. Now, examples of algae that are found in freshwater algae are the green algae like the oedogonium, the diatoms, the desmids, and many others. Now, in slow-flowing rivers with rocky shores, you may find many filamentous algae like Spirogyra or Oedogonium on those surfaces. Now, the surface of submerged rocks also shows epiphytic algae like the desmids and cyanobacteria. The third are marine habitats. Now, the sea inhabits the largest number of algae, collectively known as the seaweeds. Now, if you have been at the coast, you'll realize that the sea coast is normally periodically flooded, and sometimes when the water recedes, it's exposed to the sun. Now, the area between the high tide, when the water has come near the shore, has come to the shore or the coast, and the low tide, when water now recedes and goes back to the ocean, is known as the intertidal zone. Now, the seaweed that grows in the intertidal zone, they face alternate drying and wetting. When the water comes, they are wet. When the water recedes, they dry. They are normally firmly attached to the underlying rocks by means of holdfasts, not roots. At times, they may get detached, and you'll find them flowing in the open sea, like in the case of the Sargasso Sea. Now, an example of a seaweed, or examples of seaweeds, include the Sargassum wheatii, this and the brown algae. We also have Gracilaria edulis, and we also have the Trabinaria species. We also have, we can categorize the habitats of algae as a special attribute. That's an area where the habitat exhibit special environmental conditions. Like you can have areas where there is where we have extreme salts, such as we have the brines and the salt lakes, and this is where you will find cyanobacteria or the anabaena, and you'll find also unicellular green algae living in such areas where there are brines. Now, the very hot regions or the thermal regions where we have hot temperatures, not water, we have thermal springs with the temperatures ranging between 40 degrees Celsius to 70 degrees Celsius, inhabit alga-like algae or algae is in the plural of algae, like the Oscillariaria, we have the Mastigogladus, we have cyanobacteria. Now, the polar regions that have extremely cold climatic conditions also support the survival of algae like the nostoc and the Oscillatoria. We also have some algae that can inhabit the soils or subaerial, that is in the air. Now, the surfaces of the soils provide a very favorable substratum when they are wet for the growth of several types of algae. Now, terrestrial algae like anabaena play a major role as primary colonizers on newly exposed areas. And this one we shall be looking at it when we'll be dealing with succession. Now, subaerial algae obtain their water from the moisture in the air, and they grow if moisture is available. These subaerial algae are capable of enduring drought-like conditions when the soil has no moisture, and these are just like the soil algae. Sometimes you'll be able to see dark brown patches, sometimes with velvety carpet-like cushions covering extensively exposed surfaces of buildings. Those are just subaerial algae. So you'll find them on buildings, on the walls, on asbestos, on the roofs, on the rock surfaces, and also on tree trunks. This marks the end of algae.